What is up, everybody? In today's video, I'm going to answer a question I've gotten a few times on this channel, and that is, should I work a corporate job or should I do freelancing? Let's find out. So surprise, surprise, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this question. So let's break it down into a few different factors. So I've done both. Now, full disclosure here, I've never done machine learning for a corporation. I've done machine learning in a consulting, freelancing capacity for various small businesses and startups, but never in a corporate environment. I have, however, been a process engineer at Intel, which in some sense used data science to make decisions that drove our module forward to reduce defects and to improve the process over time. So I can speak to a corporate environment in the general sense, and you can make your own extrapolation based on what you would expect in a machine learning type position. And if any of you in the audience have direct experience working for corporations doing machine learning, please, if I say something incorrect, correct me down below. Let the audience know the truth. Again, I'm not pretending to have done something I have not. So corporations are their own beast. So the first thing I want to speak on is something about culture. So when you work for a corporation, you are really coming into a totally different culture. It will have its own vernacular, its own lingo. When I started at Intel, it took me about a month to actually literally to understand what people were saying because they spoke in terms of abbreviations and acronyms. And it took a long time to understand what all of them meant and to be able to piece them together into some type of intelligent sentence. So don't be alarmed if you start a corporate job and you are kind of inundated with lingo and don't really understand what people are saying. In addition to the lingo, there is also how people interact with each other, what are the expectations from management, how you are expected to take initiative, the corporate values, these types of things. So my job was process engineering, as I said, and what that meant literally was using data to design experiments, to conduct those experiments, and then analyze the data to make intelligent decisions about improving the process. Now, it turned out I worked in one of the worst modules in the factory for defects. I was a dry etch backend engineer, and this is an incredibly dirty part of the process. Literally dirty meaning we used plasmas to etch various types of polymers. This caused flaking off on the wafers. Those flakes would result in blocked etches, which of course results in a defect on your chip, dead die, and of course lost to the bottom line. So there was an enormous amount of pressure on us to make process tweaks to try to reduce the occurrence of those defects to maximize the profit of Intel as our part of the process. We were the only factory working on it. It was the legacy 32 and 45 nanometer at the time when Intel was on 22 nanometers. This is a few years ago. So there's an enormous amount of pressure. Part of that job, part of that process of making improvements, actually the largest part of that process was dealing with other humans. So as the process engineers were kind of near the bottom of the totem pole, the poor process engineering technicians were below us, and they caught a lot of flack, those poor guys and gals. They worked super hard, but they were the lowest on the totem pole. We were one rung above them. Above us were the integrators. Now, the integrators had a kind of bird's eye view of the process. They would look at operations on either side of the dry etch and see how what we did affected the stuff behind us and how what happened before us affected the stuff that went on at our module. So they had some clue as to how the proposed changes we were trying to implement would affect other parts of the process, in theory. Now, part of their group was to cycle people in and out. So as part of that cycling in and out, you would occasionally get people that didn't, they were new, so they didn't know you're part of the process. So you had to spend time training them, educating them, bringing them up to speed on your part of the process. Now, that wouldn't be half bad, except that those people were gatekeepers for the changes you wanted to make. You couldn't do anything without getting their buy-off. So not only did you have to educate them, you had to persuade them as well. And these are all sharp people. You're not going to lie to them and hoodwink them, and nor would you want to, because the consequences would be quite grave if you did. But you had to educate them, and as well as to persuade them that the change you wanted to make wouldn't totally destroy the process. And the culture of Intel was supposedly about risk-taking, but the reality was quite the opposite. People are generally risk-averse, and those in integration were especially so. So even if you wanted to make some change that seemed innocuous, they wanted a full full mock-up of everything. They wanted to know how it affected every part of the process, because they had to cover their own rear ends to make sure they didn't sign off on something that was going to break part of the process. And indeed, this actually happened. One of our senior engineers, the guy who had been there many, many years, highly experienced, wanted to do a very seemingly simple change in how we loaded the wafers in the machine. Totally innocuous, one would think. They signed off on it, and the end result was a massive excursion. There was a huge issue. I can't go into too many details, but it resulted in me being put on a task force along with another engineer from my module, as well as other people around the factory, to try to figure out what went wrong. We figured it out pretty quickly, but then couldn't quite understand what went wrong with that proposed change, because it was something so simple. We couldn't quite nail down the physics of it, but in the corporate world, you're not there to understand physics, you're there to solve problems. So that was the culture of Intel, to kind of give lip service to risk taking, but then very, very quickly back off that risk. There was no attempt to say, hey, how can we mitigate this damage and maybe get the benefit of the change this guy implemented, because it was a significant benefit. It wasn't like he did it just out of the blue, hoping, it would, it was calculated, it would have generated an enormous payoff had it worked. Unfortunately, not everything works out. So culture, you're going to have to deal with other people. They're going to have their own little mini culture within their own group. You're going to need a huge set of soft skills to survive in a corporation. You need to be able to persuade people, to educate them. Persuasion more than anything. You may not have to educate new people, but you certainly have to persuade people, if you're a data scientist or machine learning engineer, that what you want to do is the right thing, that you're drawing the right conclusions from the data, that you did not implicitly put bias into your data that would influence your decision making process. There's going to be a whole host of things you have to convince people that you have looked into and that your decisions are sound. So what else about culture? So many organizations have what are called performance reviews. So whenever you work for a corporation, your performance will be reviewed at least on an annual basis. That's how it was at Intel when I worked there. And now they have switched to doing it, I believe, 3 or 4 times a year. I know Netflix does it 4 times a year. I had a buddy, a very, very, very smart guy. I've known him for many years. He's a talented developer. He got axed from Netflix on one of their quarterly reviews, I guess, whatever, he didn't make the grade. And that's probably going to be the case at most organizations. I think there are a couple, maybe Microsoft doesn't. I think I read something about them doing away with it a while back, but you can expect a performance review. And so that performance review is not going to be a process in which your colleagues are going to help you out. So your colleagues are in competition with you. At least at Intel, it was a zero-sum game. They had a set amount of money they could divvy out for raises, as well as stocks they could divvy out to keep people around. And every stock that I got was one less somebody else got. So it was a zero-sum game, and there was no real cooperation, at least around that part of the job, for helping each other out. So expect a performance review, and to navigate that successfully, you want to keep something like a log, a journal, screenshots, demos, anything you can to document what you have done, because particularly if you have it yearly, it's going to be difficult to remember what you did 9 months ago, and to generate enough documentation to show it had an impact. So that's the most important thing, is to document everything you do. If you help other people, if you're spending time helping other engineers, document that as well, because that goes into team building, that goes into showing leadership, mentorship. Corporations like that, managers typically like that, because it makes them look better and makes their job easier. So keep track of everything that you do, including helping other people. Document it as best you can, including demos, video, anything you can do within the confines of the corporation. Some companies don't like you taking video of stuff. They may have issues with screenshots or whatever, but just stay within the confines of the rules, but document everything it is that you do for that performance review. So what are the upsides of working for a corporation? So the biggest upside is a steady, consistent paycheck. That is really the biggest draw to working in a corporation, in my mind anyway. Let me just say that I have no allegiance to a corporation, and neither should you. A corporation is not a person. It's not your mother, your brother, your sister, your uncle, your father. It's not related to you. It's just a conglomeration of people working towards a common goal. And as soon as you are in the way of that common goal, you will be steamrolled. And that's just the way it is. So don't have loyalty to the corporation beyond what is required by the ethics of the job. Don't do something shady and screw over your employer, certainly, but don't go out of your way to sacrifice for a corporation that isn't going to reward you with sufficient remuneration. If you're going to have to work twice as much but only get paid 3% more, then you need to recalculate your earnings right there. You're going to have to think of a new way to make money, maybe switch to a different job. So steady paycheck is the biggest draw for a corporation. Brand cachet is another. Having worked at Intel, there's a certain amount of cachet, at least there used to be until they lost the process lead. There's a certain amount of cachet that goes with that. Certainly working for Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, any of those mega corporations has its own, certain kind of swagger to it. And that's cool. It is part of the culture where, hey, we are Google, we are whatever, we impact the world. We're major players. We're part of something greater. And that is part of the Kool-Aid. Don't chug the Kool-Aid. You can sip it, don't chug it. Don't go all in on that because I don't think you should plan on making a corporation your end game, but it is a step in the process to achieving wealth in life. So aside from the steady paycheck and brand cachet, there is the experience you get. You're going to get to work on significant problems and have some real impact in the world. That is always nice. If you value that kind of thing. If you don't, then it's neutral at best, I suppose. But if you value that kind of thing, then working for a corporation is probably going to satisfy that need for you. So what are some of the downsides? Well, the downside are kind of numerous. One is that in many cases, it is a zero-sum game, so you're constantly in competition with your coworkers. So don't get too chummy with them. Always be on the lookout. Understand that different corporations will have varying degrees of this, but everybody's looking out for themselves, right? We're all self-interested, and you shouldn't be too altruistic to a fault. Help people if you can. Make sure to document it, but never allow someone to walk all over you, because at the end of the day, they're out for them. You should be out for you, and that's just how it is. So another downside is a lack of autonomy, at least in most places. You are working to solve a particular problem for the corporation. So if you are an exceptionally curious type person, you want to work on other things, you don't want to work on a single project, for extended periods of time, then that will be a downside. I don't know what the turnover rate on projects is for machine learning in corporations, but I suspect it's of order, months to years. So if it bores you to tears working on one thing for years at a time, then, or maybe many, many months at a time, then that will certainly be a downside for you. Another downside is that you will be expected to work more for less, by which I mean working overtime is generally going to be expected because the person next to you is going to do it. And so you're going to be expected to do it too. Now, this is a balancing act where I don't advocate surrendering your life to a corporation at all. My personal philosophy is that a corporate job is a means to an end. You should act ethically and do the best possible job you can while you're there. But your end goal isn't to be the CEO of the company, isn't to make manager. It is to build a war chest and move out on your own and do other more exciting things that you want to do and make your own impact on the world. So never work more for less. If you're going to end up doubling up, then you need to, on somebody else's work for an extended period of time. If someone goes out on vacation, you're covering for them. That's kind of expected. They would do the same for you, just part of the job. But if you are full-time covering two roles, then you need to be jockeying for getting more compensation for that. And don't be afraid to push for it, because nobody's going to advocate for you. Everybody's out for themselves, right? And that's a fact, whether you realize it or not. They're not going to argue for you. You have to argue for yourself. And they're not going to get, not like your manager's going to get upset if you say, hey, I'm doing XYZ. I have brought ABC value to the company. It's impacted the bottom line this way. It's saved money. It's, a stellar new product for us or whatever. They're not going to think that you're being greedy or unethical by asking for more money for accomplishing more. Never ask for more money because you need it, right? Nobody gives a crap what you need. It's really irrelevant. Only ask for more money that is commensurate with the value you have provided to the company. So corporate life in a nutshell is going to be working long hours, getting paid a steady paycheck, a decent amount, with a company culture where a lot of the people are going to have guzzled the Kool-Aid. They're going to be, all in, full on board with the culture, and you're going to have varying needs for soft skills to persuade people to navigate the corporate environment. But all in all, I think it's a great place to start. I think that if you are just out of college, definitely try to land the most most prestigious job you can that pays the most money, because that's going to pay dividends, throughout your career. Once you get that first job, nobody cares about your degree. So that first job is really, really important. And so it behooves you to, once you graduate, get a job for the best company you can, making as much money as you possibly can. So freelancing. Now I have some direct experience here. So freelancing is a bit of a mixed bag. So what are the upsides of freelancing? There are quite a few. The biggest upside of freelancing is that you are kind of your own manager. You're not your own boss. The client is the boss, but you are your own manager. And many clients are hands off, particularly for something like machine learning, where unless you're slotting in with a dev shop or an existing team, they're not going to know a whole lot about it. So they're going to be really relying on you to do the right thing. So you don't get micromanaged, which is an upside, but it's also an enormous amount of responsibility, right? You can't screw up, otherwise, you've wasted the client's money, you've wasted their time, and that's going to look bad. So there is a lot of pressure to perform, to do well, and to guide the client toward making the right decision. Another upside is that if you don't like a client, you can fire them. It's really painful to leave a corporation, particularly ones that give you stocks to stay on board, because those stocks will typically vest over a period of years, and if you leave, you don't get them. So there's a cost to leaving, but the cost of firing a bad client is, whatever. You've got to go find another client, and you should have a war chest saved up so that you can facilitate that if you need to, because you will run into bad clients. There's good clients, there's bad clients. There's good developers, bad developers, right? There's a distribution of people, so it's something you should plan for. But it is quite simple and straightforward to fire a bad client. And if you're using something like Upwork, they may try to hold a bad review over you. I wouldn't allow them to do that. I would just say whatever, leave whatever review you want, because you can always leave a response to it, and you can always speak to that on your next gig. Say, hey, the client was unreasonable. I have this chat logs to prove it. If you really want to see, whatever. A client isn't going to look at one bad review and say this developer sucks or I'm not going to hire them. They understand that some people are reasonable, some people aren't. Another upside is that you get to work on many different projects. So you should really specialize in one thing. You should kind of know, if you do like computer vision or natural language processing, you should really specialize in one vertical, but you'll get to work on a variety of projects with a variety of different teams and companies, and that's pretty cool. You don't really stagnate on one thing. You get to move from project to project, solving problems, new problems, getting to see how different businesses work. That's kind of the another benefit, is that you get to see how different teams, businesses, industries, verticals work. So you get a fresh perspective pretty much with every new job. Other upsides are that you have to develop your soft skills. Now, this may seem like a downside for some because you don't like to sell, but really everything you do in life is a sale. If you're trying to get a girl to go out on a date with you, that's a sale. You're trying to sell yourself over the next guy that's trying to do the same thing, right? You're trying to say, I'm a man of value, hire me for the job. I'm a man of value, go out, on a date with me. So sales is critically important. It's a soft skill that we all really need to work on, and freelancing really gives you the chance to work on sales on a nearly perpetual basis because you're always hunting for new gigs. Which brings me to one of my first downsides of freelancing. You really are hunting for new gigs quite frequently, particularly if you're firing clients. And if you find yourself firing a bunch of clients, maybe the clients aren't the problem, maybe it's you, but I digress. You're always going to be on the hunt for new clients because the project is going to end at some point, and so you're going to want to have something lined up for the end of that project so you have continuity of income. The flip side of that, and a pro of freelancing, is that with each new job you can negotiate a pay raise, right? You can say, and if they push back, I've had people push back. They say, well, you charge this other person, X dollars. Why are you charging us, 1.2X? The answer is, well, I'm much better at my job now. I've already done something similar. I can get this done more quickly, more thoroughly. I can write better documentation. If you think I'm expensive, wait till you hire the person that does it cheaply. Then you'll find out how cheap I actually was. So each job is an opportunity to negotiate a pay raise, which is really great for your bottom line. I've seen freelancers, I've worked with freelancers that have made well over $250,000 on Upwork. I've seen others that have made $1 million plus over the course of like a decade. That's probably pretty rare, at least on Upwork, but you can make big money as a freelancer, but it is a bit of a slog. So that's another downside, is that you will be sending out many proposals. You will be interviewing for many gigs and not getting all of them. So you're going to have to learn to face rejection. That isn't a huge deal. Rejection is, whatever, who cares? It just means there's more chances to learn, more opportunities to find other gigs. But it is something to take into account. If you have difficulty dealing with it, get used to it, right? You have to deal with that if you're interviewing too. When I was looking for jobs right after graduate school, I sent out something like 50 or 60 different resumes, proposals, and I only heard back from 3 or 4 of them. Most of them went into a black hole, particularly with IBM. You never hear back. You don't know what happened to it. Nothing ever comes of it. So rejection is just a fact of life. It's particularly prevalent with freelancing. So learn to live with it, learn to embrace it, and you'll go quite far. Another downside, and this is something I encountered on my last gig, is you can be strong-armed to accept BS that wouldn't fly in a corporation. So in a corporation, they're not going to, usually aren't going to decrease your pay. They're not going to decrease your hours. Whereas on some freelance contracts, the client can be like, hey, I'm running out of money here. I've been totally mismanaged a project, so you're going to have to take less money and work less hours. That's happened to me. My response is usually, well, that's your problem. You can either pay me what you pay me, or I'll go work somewhere else. No big deal. And you should never accept that, but people will try it. Never accept less than you're worth, but people will try it. So it's just something to be aware of. Don't stand for it. Always be assertive. Always stand up for yourself. And unless you've screwed up, unless you're not worth the money they're paying you, then in that case, take the lower pay. But if you're worth it, then definitely push back on that. So one other option here is consulting. So consulting is actually separate from freelancing. Freelancing, the connotation of that is that you're actually doing the labor, you're doing the coding, the testing, the implementing. The consulting role means you are strategizing, trying to understand the needs of the business and designing solutions. And then you may do some of the coding, but you're probably delegating or working with other programmers, other engineers that are implementing the solutions as you go along, and you're managing the client, managing the contract, managing the project. Now that's kind of, in my opinion, one of the second tier of what you should attempt to achieve, right? My personal philosophy is you should start out in a corporation, build a war chest, build experience, build contacts, become a very solid engineer, move on to freelancing, do really well there, and then gradually move into a consulting type role to where you are charging more money because you're providing more value, because you are not focused on selling software, you're focused on selling solutions to problems. In the end, that's really all businesses care about is, hey, we have some problem, it's costing X dollars. If we can buy a solution that is less than X dollars and, solve the problem, hey, we're going to do that. And so consulting is your opportunity to really play arbitrage there, to say there is some value to this problem that they're trying to solve. My skills have this value here. Let's try to kind of skim that area and get some of that profit for ourselves. And you can make more money than you can in freelancing because you are not tying your money directly to the hours you work. You're tying your pay to the solution of a problem. And that goes into the process of selling. A great book to look at for learning how to sell high-ticket stuff is called Spin Selling. It's an acronym for situation, problem, implication, and need. There are 4 different types of questions you can ask in the sales process, and need-based questions are the most strongly correlated with high-ticket sales. I should have an Amazon affiliate link for that, but I don't. Anyway, go buy it if you're thinking about consulting or freelancing. It's a great book. It'll teach you how to sell effectively at the high ticket range. One other option is startups. I didn't talk too much about that because it's really going to be similar to the corporation. The difference is going to be there's going to be less bureaucracy. There's going to be a faster pace. You don't have as many checks and balances or gatekeepers, but the expectations are going to be the same. You're going to have to work really hard, long hours. The one thing I will say is that you should never, under any circumstances, work for equity solely. You should always get a paycheck. You should always get a salary, and then if the company wants to offer equity on top of that, that's fine, but you should never work solely for equity because you don't know, right? 99%, 95% or so of the businesses are going to fail, and in which case equity is worth precisely 0. You can't eat on IOUs, so you need cold hard cash coming in. So never take equity in lieu of a paycheck. Always take a paycheck, and if they offer equity, hey, that's awesome because it may make you a millionaire, who knows, but definitely never under any circumstances work just for equity. So I hope that is helpful. Those are my experiences working for a corporation and as a freelancer. Please share your own experiences down below. I've only worked, a finite number of gigs. The collective group of us have worked far more, so we can all help each other by sharing our stories. Please do so down below. If you found it helpful, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, share this, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.